Those who came to America to look for gold were told by a 10-year-old girl the way to the gold mine. In fact, a gold mine had no status in front of her. This 10-year-old girl is among the most important characters in American history. She played a key role in saving and settling Jamestown, the first British settlement. Americans still feel indebted to this girl. Who was this girl? How was Jamestown settled and ruined? How did Jamestown lay the foundations of a superpower nation? This is the eastern state of Virginia in the United States of America. Thousands of tourists today visit its white, golden, sandy beaches. But 5 centuries ago, this coast was completely deserted. People lived here, but they were far away from the coast. Here was the Powhatan Empire of the Native Americans, which was a union of over 30 tribes, spread over miles in the form of dozens of villages. On the same coast, which is surrounded by water on 3 sides, had the landing of 104 Englishmen with a huge amount of arms on ships in 1607. They set up their first colony over here. They named the colony Jamestown after their king, King James III, and the river flowing along called the James River. The British built a small settlement of moderate tents in Jamestown and built a strong, high wooden fence around it. Now they call it Jamestown Fort. A thatched house, a barn, and a church were built in the fort. This fort was triangular, with a turret at each corner installed with a cannon. It was done so that if the Spanish people were fierce enemies of the British, or the Native Americans who were mistakenly taken for Indians at first, would attack, the people of Jamestown could fight and protect the town. Jamestown is settled, but now a new problem arises. That is, the land around Jamestown was swampy, was not at all suitable for farming. So, within a short time, Jamestown badly ran out of food. People began to die of starvation. So at that time, a 10-year-old girl came to their aid. She was a girl from the Powhatan tribe. Her actual name was Mataoka, but she was known by her nickname, Pocahontas, which stood for a naughty girl or the mischievous. How did this girl get to Jamestown? It happened shortly after Jamestown was settled. One day in 1607, Native Americans captured an Englishman, John Smith. He and 2 companions went deep into the territory of the Powhatan Empire. Here, he was attacked by 200 tribal warriors. Smith and his companions tried unsuccessfully to defend themselves. John Smith's companions were killed, and he was captured. The natives arrested Smith and took him to their king. The king tried hard to find out Smith's intentions for being on his land. He picked up a little bit of what Smith said, but the language barrier prevented him from knowing it all. We wonder what the king actually understood, but he ordered John to be killed. Smith's head was placed on a stone, and the king was about to crush his skull with a club, when a 10-year-old girl rushed and placed her head over Smith's. The entire atmosphere was filled with calmness. The raised hands got still where they were. The girl performed this tribal ritual to save Smith's life was named Pocahontas, and she was the same girl who was the princess of this empire, the king's daughter. The king spared Smith's life due to the intervention of his daughter. Later, he offered him unprecedented hospitality. He made him his own son and sent him safely back to Jamestown. After that, Pocahontas would frequently go to Jamestown with food and drink. This ended the food shortage in Jamestown, giving people a new lease of life. Maybe for this reason, John Smith was made governor. He had good ties with Princess Pocahontas and the Powhatan Empire. Gradually, a large-scale trade between Native Americans and the British began. The tribesmen supplied Jamestown with food and other necessities. In return, the British would sell them weapons and other tools, etc. This pleasant, friendly atmosphere and business lasted for some time. But then, as in Ahmad Faraz's words, "As it is said, the affairs of the heart also have an age." So, the cordial affairs of the 2 nations soon reached the end of their age. But how did it come? The reason for the change of heart and the situation was that the demand for food items from the British increased day by day. However, the Powhatans did not have so much food because this area of Virginia had the worst famine in the 8th century. So the Native Americans also had no extra food for the people of Jamestown. So the relationship between the two started to deteriorate. To save relations, John Smith went to see the king of the Powhatans in early 1609. This meeting took place. in a very cordial atmosphere. But when everyone went to sleep at night, Smith's eyes suddenly opened. Someone was sitting beside him crying. It was Pocahontas. She weepingly told Smith her father was going to kill him, so she ran away. The second time the Princess of the Powhatans had saved John Smith's life, actually, protection was not of Smith, but of the seed of a future superpower, that she was doing unconsciously. So Smith and her companions immediately ran for their lives. Jamestown was also alerted, and thus, all lives were saved. But after some time, Smith got injured and returned to England. But now, in order to settle Jamestown with more soldiers and people, a new governor also arrived from England. Then ties between the Jamestown and Powhatan tribes had been normal again. Although not as before, it is normal. With the arrival of a new governor and people, the population of Jamestown increased. Now, some people from Jamestown would go to the Powhatan tribes and get so impressed by their hospitality and customs that the whites begin to live with them. Most of the men came from England and Europe to Jamestown at that time. The number of women was negligible. The British took full, undue, and illegal advantage of this growing male workforce. At first, they started attacking the Native Americans. Secondly, the settlers, i.e. the whites, who were irritated by the lack of food and drink, went to the Powhatan tribes and began to live with them, started to be called traders by the people of Jamestown. These deserted Englishmen were located, and if the people of Jamestown would catch any, he was burned alive or subjected to any other painful death. Princess Pocahontas and others left for Jamestown due to such happenings, and disastrously resulted in Jamestown. That was in 1609, when the Virginia region was passing through the worst famine. Jamestown, which already had an acute shortage of food and drink, received another 300 people from England. These people did not bring any extra food or drink with them, so they all looked at each other with fear, and their eyes told each other that the winter was coming. They were afraid of the winter or the cold season, because it was too harsh in Virginia. There was nothing to eat, there was no hunting and growing, anything was a far cry. In this situation, people started dying in Jamestown due to hunger and thirst. Within a few weeks, 100 Englishmen were killed. The survivors boiled and ate their pet dogs, cats, and even the shoe leather. When it was all over, a painful and surprising step was taken to sustain life. They dug out the bodies of their own men from the graves and ate them too. They would lick the blood if the body of a weak, dying person started to bleed. Modern-day experts from the dead of hunger found the reputrid skull of a 14-year-old girl and reshaped it into her face as a model. At that time, her body was exhumed and eaten by the settlers. This unfortunate girl was given the fictitious name of Jane. This period in Jamestown history is called the Starving Time, or Starvation Period. The desperation of the British increased to such an extent that many Englishmen. He left Jamestown and took refuge with the Powhatans, Native Americans, and became a permanent part of their society. When winter began in 1609, 500 Englishmen lived in Jamestown. But at the end of the winter, only 60 were barely alive, frozen in the snow. When the weather became a bit favorable, they left Jamestown and headed to the coast for England. But on the shore, they saw some ships coming from a distance. These ships were coming from England. On ships were the new governors of Jamestown, Lord Delaware, and the other 150. The ships were also loaded with food and drink in heavy quantities. The joy for the starving British on the arrival of the ships was like paradise. Those who had lost all their loved ones and all their hopes, their hearts were filled with this good news, and they got fresh life. He abandoned his plans to return to England and came back to the fort of Jamestown. When Delaware set foot in Jamestown in 1610, it was a deserted settlement. People here were alive, but they looked like corpses. The Delaware provided food for the dying, and also began preparations for war against the Powhatan Empire. First, he demanded that the Powhatan Empire return the English deserters, who had left Jamestown during starving time. Delaware wanted to punish them terribly, but when the Powhatans refused to hand him over to the white fugitives, Delaware sent a military force to attack them. These soldiers attacked the village of an allied tribe of Powhatans and brutally put to death anyone they found. Then they captured the queen of the village and her 2 innocent children and aboded them in a boat and headed for Jamestown. However, on the way, soldiers had a change in mood. They threw the children into the water and fired bullets into their skulls. The queen was brought to Jamestown to be burned alive. But in the meantime, the commander of the army took pity on the queen. Instead of burning her alive, the commander stabbed her to death. It was the kind of mercy this British commander. Obviously, the Powhatans were not going to sit quietly on such attacks. They could not attack the fort at Jamestown openly as the British had installed cannons which the natives could not withstand. However, there are few Englishmen outside Jamestown, for farming or other work became easy prey for the tribes. They would be killed or kidnapped by the Powhatans. Besides this guerrilla war, Jamestown had no food supply from the Powhatans. So sanity prevailed among the British, and they thought to explore peaceful ways. But they won this peace not at the negotiating table, but at gunpoint. They kidnapped Pocahontas, the princess of the Powhatans. The same princess gave Jamestown new life at one time. The British conspired with a local chieftain to kidnap Pocahontas. This insider knew Pocahontas, and he duped the girl to a British ship, and she fell hostage to the British. In the year 1613, Pocahontas was about 15 or 16 years of age. The Pocahontas' abduction is a vital chapter of British and American history. The Powhatan Empire surrendered to the British after this kidnapping. The guerrilla war was terminated and food supply restored. But the British did not stay here. They forcibly converted Pocahontas to Christianity and named her Rebecca, and married her to an Englishman, John Ralph. However, for this marriage, according to custom, the British had gotten the permission of the girl's father, the Native Americans' king. Obviously, his father had no choice but to allow the marriage of a kidnapped girl. But this girl told the Americans, who were unsuccessfully trying to find gold, a secret is more valuable than gold and a gold mine. This secret was to determine the life and death of Englishmen for future centuries. This secret founded the establishment of an independent America. This secret was smoke, cultivation of tobacco. Before Jamestown, the Spaniards were killing people in South America, had learned the secrets of growing tobacco from the Native Americans. The Spaniards were making a lot of money by supplying tobacco to Europe, but he did not share the secret of growing tobacco with anyone else. The Spanish conquistadors thus had a monopoly on the tobacco trade. They dominated this field for a century. After 100 years, the situation changed. Tobacco seeds somehow got into the hands of an English farmer, who took them to Jamestown in 1612. This Englishman was none other than John Ralph, to whom Pocahontas was forced to marry. Until marriage, John Ralph experimented with growing tobacco in Jamestown, but he was not successful with tobacco production on a commercial scale. But now, after marrying Pocahontas, it all changed. Pocahontas, a Native American, knew well the local environment and agriculture. Her efforts soon produced the best tobacco crops in Jamestown. Jamestown has now begun shipping tobacco to England, ending Spain's monopoly on the trade. Thus, the small settlement of Jamestown became a lucrative colony. That is, a self-sustainable colony. After that, a large number of people aspired to visit England. From England and Europe, people came to Jamestown and around to grow tobacco. Jamestown quickly grew from a small settlement and fort to a large town. An interesting feature of the matter was, in the first 11 years of Jamestown, the women were only 100 in number. These women came to Jamestown with their husbands or parents to help them. As the number of men in Jamestown began to increase, the Virginia Company began regular business immigration of women here. In 1619, as many as 90 women were sent to Jamestown. These women married local settlers. Thus began family farmhouses and family life with tobacco in Jamestown. Families were formed, so now there were also children. So families grew, and tobacco fields also began to expand along with it. Now, the need for labor in these expanding fields has also increased. However, the landowners of Jamestown were not rich enough to hire laborers from Europe and then pay them salaries. In other words, every Englishman who came from Europe could, by force, spread his farm of choice on the unending American land. So the problem is, labor in these fields was found in an element that remained a problem for America for centuries. Truly, this is still America's fault line. This solution is called slaves of Africa. In 1619, a Jamestown ship robbed a Portuguese ship with a Dutch ship's help. This Portuguese ship was used for the slave trade. 50 black African slaves, including women and children, were taken to Jamestown. Jamestown farmers bought 20 black slaves from here. Thus began the 250-year-long era of slavery in the United States of America. Since the British initially owned very little land in and around Jamestown, therefore many settlers built small farms on their lawns and backyards, where they grew tobacco. When the British population grew, they felt the need for new lands, so they grabbed the land of the Powhatan Empire. Pocahontas, the guarantor of British and Native Americans' peace, was no more. Because 3 or 4 years before the time we are talking about in 1616, Pocahontas had gone to England with her husband, John Ralph, and son. Here she appeared at the court of King James and was treated as a royal guest. She was very well received. Rather, she was portrayed in Western dresses, and her Christian name, Rebecca, was written in these portraits. This hospitality showed that the British ruled for the survival of Jamestown, valued Pocahontas much higher. But in 1617, England lost this trump card. Once on the ship while returning to Virginia, Pocahontas became ill. She was taken back to Gravesend, England, where she died. Pocahontas was reburied in the same area. However, the history of the girl was expressed by Native Americans gave the impression that she did not die a natural death but was killed by. She was poisoned. Pocahontas has become a legend in early American history. Many films and cartoons have been produced on it. An animated film was made in 1995, also showed Pocahontas in love with John Smith, governor of Jamestown. The death of Pocahontas ended the peace era of the English and Powhatan empires. The Powhatan tribes were now freed from the blackmailing of the British. So they also stood up for the protection of the motherland. The less secure new British settlements around Jamestown began to become their targets. In one such attack in 1622, 347 British, including women and children, were killed. Among them was Pocahontas' husband, John Ralph, who returned to Virginia after his wife's death. But even this massacre could not stop the settlement of the British, and they continued to seize the lands of the Powhatans by defeating them repeatedly. In addition to guns, the British also had the help of some Native Americans who were hostile to the Powhatan tribes. In 1644, the Powhatans fought the last battle for independence from the British. It was a decisive battle in which 500 British and Europeans were killed. But the Powhatans lost this battle, and then their king was also killed. In 1646, the Powhatan surrendered, and the British enslaved them and seized their land in the name of peace. Thus, starting from the small settlement of Jamestown, the British occupied a large part of Virginia in just 39 years. The English, who once crowned the king of the Powhatans in Virginia, had stripped him of his throne, crown, and land today. Today, the only remnant of this vast empire is a 1,500-acre tract of land known as the Pamunkey Reservation. Outside of it is carved the face of the king, Pocahontas' father, on a rock. The reservation is still inhabited by some descendants of the Powhatan Empire. Such reservations also exist for other Native American tribes across the United States, whose lands were taken by these whites, Americans, and Europeans. Virginia was taken over by the British, and Jamestown was also destroyed in 1699. Now Jamestown has been rebuilt as a monument in the same place, where tourists from around the world come to Virginia to see. Here are also models of the 3 ships on which Jamestown's first settlers arrived. The statues of Pocahontas are also in Jamestown, England. This was the story when I was in the United States of America. The British had first settled in Jamestown to found superpower America. Jamestown was passing through its initial stages of success. The British were also establishing another colony in America. This colony became such a success that every 10th American today belongs to it. In fact, the movement for freedom from Britain had also taken birth in this colony. This colony's story is actually about America, which we all call the USA today. What was the story of this colony? How did the Jamestown slave come to be used in this new colony? How were crops grown in the sand? Was that Thanksgiving Day or a spooky Halloween look? All of this you will know on the next episode. Subscribe our channel, like the video and press the bell icon to get notification of our new videos.